This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and today I'm joined by Tom Stimpson, our head of horticulture, and we thought the two of us would just catch up on the things as gardeners that we really love in the run-up to Christmas to bring in for drying so that it's not all about bought-in tinsel and bling. It's about homegrown Christmas decorations. And of course, that's more sustainable and it's just a lovely thing to do. And the longer I garden, the more I do this. And we actually have just been doing a little film of all the things that have been harvested from the garden that we're going to overlay this recording, this podcast with, so that you can see some of the things that we're talking about. But yeah, it's just all the way through the year in a way, just getting oneself into the mindset that dried flowers, seed heads, grasses are not the old-fashioned maiden aunt, pub, fireplace, summer filler. They're actually things of grace, style, elegance and sophistication. And their second name is sustainability because they're not flown from the other side of the world and they're not made of plastic. So, hello, Tom. Let us have a think of our absolute favourite things for picking from the garden, for drying inside. I'll talk about the technicalities of that in a minute, but why don't you kick us off with your number one?
I'm going to start with hydrangea flowers, the paniculata types. And in my garden, as some listeners may remember from a previous podcast, I've got two varieties that I particularly love, Limelight and Little Fresco. And the Little Fresco just is the most brilliant one for drying. So I find I just cut it when it's in that lovely blushed kind of appearance. I'll cut a few stems and then just put it into a vase with a little bit of water and then just let it dry naturally over a few weeks. And I find it does keep its colour that way. And in fact, this year I had some stems that were 3 years old. I'd kept them in a little vase, just 3 stems, and they just kept their colour. And it was I only threw them out a couple of months ago.
Wow.
And I thought, I just looked at them. They were a bit cobwebby. And I just thought, actually, these are not now starting to look as I remember them. So I've repeated the process again this year. I've cut a few more and I shall really enjoy them. I love them through the winter, not just for Christmas, but I really love those.
Yeah, year round, really. That's what, not just for Christmas, exactly as you say. Well, two things that spring to mind. So I also really love them. And the one that I have, and really we harvest a lot of here, is Incredible. And the reason is, as its name implies, it's huge. So it is an incredible. And so when it dries, obviously it shrinks a bit, but you're still left with something not much smaller than a football. I mean, it is a bit smaller, I suppose, but it's really quite an amazing thing. And what I find in the barn, for instance, where in the winter, obviously we haven't got much to pick, if I just do a really big vase of those, and just like you say, I just put a little bit of water in the bottom of the vase and just let them dry, they really have a presence and a beauty all the way through.
Yes.
And you can, of course, you can dip them in some in some paint, which is more sustainable than a spray paint. And I think, like a lime wash or a white wash or whatever, one of those groovy new non-toxic paints, that really is rather nice. And even if it's quite a sort of dilute solution, so it sort of drips off a bit, you get a really nice kind of wash of extra colour. And so I've been experimenting with that. And it's nice. And just two technical things, just as you were talking about, or perhaps three actually, about drying your hydrangeas. So you do them just standing them upright in a little bit of water and the plant just absorbs them. And what I find with that is they keep their colour, but they do become a bit crispy. So if you touch them, they will disintegrate. Now, what you can do is you can put some plant glycerin. And if you do it, I think it's 1 to 10, the recipe that I do. So 1 part glycerin to 10 parts water. And again, just a little bit in the bottom of the vase. What you'll do is you will maintain the softer texture, because of course that's an oily solution, and it will mean that the texture of the petal doesn't become crunchy. So if you want to store them almost forever, I would recommend the glycerin. But there is a but, which is I do think the colour isn't sustained as well as just in pure water. So there are sort of pros and cons to that. So you get the texture, but less the colour, I would say.
Yes, could be a bit of a trade-off, but I might give that a go. Actually, that I've never tried that. I've only ever just dried them in a little bit of water. But I totally appreciate what you say. Yes, they do go a little bit crispy, and some of the lower flowers can start to brown quite quickly. So I think I might try that.
Yeah, we'll experiment and feedback.
Great tip.
But the main thing I just wanted to say before we move on to the other things in our list is it is all about air humidity. And so we have really learnt this to our cost here at Perch Hill, which is that we used to harvest huge amounts of stuff and we would take them down to the polytunnel and we would have them either standing like alliums or whatever, which we'll come on to, or hanging. But we find by the time you get into November and December, the humidity in our air, just everywhere, gets so high that they actually start to get that black rot and they just go. So we've tried them in the polytunnel. We've tried them in what we call our hovel, which is an open-sided barn, and neither have worked. And so now what we do really, and has made all the difference, is that we harvest them, we hang them, or have them vertical in a vase, but often we hang them, but they're in the barn, which is a drier, more arid environment than outside. So they do need to be, in my experience, they need to have that more arid air, not arid, but, not that high humidity air, because then you will get rot coming in and they go black. And so it's really important. Air circulation is key for drying flowers that you want to keep the colour and you don't want them to rot. It's absolutely key. And then the final other tip that I have discovered with drying is I do think hair dryers are quite handy, not for drying, but if you've got something that you really love, like I have a wreath that is as wide as my arms spread, so maybe 3 meters across, that I made for a huge door here about 10 years ago. And it took me a good half day, if not more, and a lot of materials to make. And so I don't want to chuck that at the end of the season. So we have it hanging on the wall. And do you know what I do? I just once a year or twice a year, I just get my hairdryer and I just blitz it with the hairdryer and it just blows all the cobwebs and all the dust away without doing any damage. And it's just a really good tip for if you want something to just last forever. I remember walking into a really beautiful studio in Manhattan where they had teasels in this all white room, white painted floor, white walls, and white frames to the windows. And there was this big grand piano and just this massive sort of dustbin of teasels, and they'd sprayed those white, and he had had them for 10 years, and he was the man who taught me. He just said, just blitz them with your hairdryer every so often to just sort of blow the dust off them or the cobwebs off them, and they'll last forever.
Oh, brilliant. Great tip.
All things worth thinking about. Anyway, back to our recommendations. So, Tom, what would be your next thing that you would love after the hydrangeas?
Well, I do love straw flowers, and I know you do too.
Yeah.
And I love them. I think you can do so many things with them. They can just be a dried bunch, but I particularly love them when they're put together on a chain, sort of mini little garland that you can then hang in the windowsill, round a mirror frame, drape through your Christmas tree, or however you choose to display them. But I think that colours are so lovely, and there's such a wide variety of colours. And once they dry, for me, it's the warm sort of oranges and maroons and crimsons. I love those colours.
Yeah. And they keep their colour
I
forever,
know.
don't they? Yeah.
They're so good.
Amazing. Yeah. They
And
are.
I also love them made into little
Pom-poms.
circle decorations for
Yeah.
Christmas trees and hung with ribbon. I think they're really quite special and very, very different.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're definitely top of my list.
Yes, good. Well, linked to those in a way are dahlias and perhaps tulips, which we could just drop in there. But obviously, there are still dahlias in the garden now that you might be able to dry. Not tulips, of course. And I did a whole podcast actually with Philippa from Just Dahlias because her business has now moved almost as much about growing dahlias and tubers to actually selling dried dahlias. And they're really beautiful. Anyway, under her tutelage and inspiration, we've been experimenting with drying dahlias here at Perch Hill this year. And she very much taught me that air circulation, again, is absolutely key. So you don't want to tie them hanging in a bunch. You want to tie them each individual flower. And definitely the dark, rich colours seem to dry even better. And of course, the big ones are great because, again, just like I said with the hydrangeas, they shrink. So if you've got quite a small flowered variety, like one of the drumstick ones, like pom-pom and ball varieties, they shrink, by 40 or 50%, let's say. And that can be rather amazing. But if you want something quite showy and a sort of centerpiece, then you want the bigger ones. And so we've been experimenting with that quite a bit this year and with great success. So it's just hanging them upside down, good air circulation, regularly picking them, ideally after a dry day, so that they come in and they're relatively dry. But, it's probably not dry now. But if you've still got some out there, I think it's definitely worth doing. And you can look back for more details on that to the podcast with Philippa that happened earlier in the summer. So they have been the next thing that we've enjoyed experimenting with, kind of linked with straw flowers. And the colour changes, but they keep the pigment. They don't go brown. They keep the pigment. And that's what's exciting, I think. And same with tulips. We found that they keep the pigment. It might change, but they don't go brown. So that is a thing that is really lovely.
Do the darker colours fade more gracefully, do you think, than the paler ones? Or...
Well, it's funny. I mean, we've done cafe au lait drying here, and I found them a little bit Cruella de Vil, a bit sort of attic-y, cobwebby kind of.
Yeah.
So I wasn't so sure about them. Whereas I find the rich ones and the oranges, they become more muted and more kind of autumnal, but they keep their pigment. But Philippa also dries white ones very successfully, and they go sort of almost creamy ivory coloured. But anyway, I think it's definitely worth experimenting with. And I'm certainly going to use those for our Christmas table this year. I'm going to just have the dried heads of dahlias all the way down between fairy lights. And, homegrown Christmas decks, that is a good thing to do, I would say. One or two more from you, Tom?
I particularly love globe thistles, sort of the echinopsis.
Yeah.
And I just think they have such structure. And because you get several thistle-like flowers on one stem, the effect is overall is really good and quite full. And I found that I could get the best results if I pick them just when the buds are changing to that lovely blue colour.
Yes.
Find if you pick them then you seem to retain the colour. And again, I dry them just the same way as I do the hydrangeas, a little bit of water. And I just literally put them on the kitchen windowsill and let the water evaporate.
Yeah.
And I've done a few like that over the last couple of years. And I really love them. They're lovely with fairy lights dangled around them for Christmas in a big vase. I did that last year, had a massive vase, put it on the chest in the sitting room and just draped some fairy lights through them. Brilliant. Popped in a few alliums as well. Really lovely. So yeah, I think they're great for architectural presence.
Excellent. And mine, sort of similar to that in a way, is Common Law Garden Honesty. Now, I mean, I'm sure you all know about drying honesty and about just carefully removing the outer two layers and leaving the coin-like, sort of mother-of-pearl-like opalescent seed holding membrane in the middle. I think a lovely thing that I was taught by a very ornamental gardener who was another of my godmothers. She taught me to do it in the garden. So she actually does that of them still outside in the garden. And then she will harvest them before it gets too wet and bring them in and use them for Christmas. And just like you were saying about straw flowers, I think it's really lovely to make them into chains. And some of them are too brittle, but I find some, if I just have quite a fine needle and cotton, I can then lace them into a chain. And again, either have them hanging on a mirror or running down the middle of the table, and not just for Christmas, but right the way through the winter. They just have this sort of nice shimmery thing going on,
Yes.
which just picks up on light so well. So good old Lunaria or Honesty. Hopefully there might still be a few standing in your garden if you get out there quick. And the outer seed, the 2 layers, really, even when it's already got quite damp, often protect that membrane in the middle. So you'll find that hopefully they won't have rotted already. So that would be another one that, I'm sure you all know, but just worth a nudge, get out there and pick some quick. So back to you, Tom.
Well, I guess we've got to include alliums.
Yeah, good shout.
I know that the tops of your list too. In fact, I can remember seeing them at Purchell, actually, big vases of them, and in your sitting room, seeing them. I mean, they're really beautiful. But I think for me, I love that there are 3 that I quite like. For the smaller size, I love Purple Sensation.
Yes.
I just think that because it's crops so well and produces so many flowers, in my small space, it's just brilliant for that. So I can harvest those quite easily.
Yeah.
Then I love Christophii for a little bit bigger. And I love the starry like flowers on Christophii. I just, they're quite magical, really. And then just a few of Schubertii, just because they're like fireworks, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, when they're in flower, they're beautiful, but then when they dry, and for me, I guess I just quite like them just natural, just plain, just dried. And again, this past Christmas, I did another big vase. We didn't have a Christmas tree last year. And I just did big vases of dried stuff.
Yeah.
And all these 3 varieties of alliums were put in a massive vase. Again, I put fairy lights all the way through them.
Yeah.
And
that was your Christmas tree.
Yeah, they were really magical. Placed in front of a mirror, so you get that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it sort of magnifies the light, doesn't it? Even more. Makes them look bigger than they actually are.
Yeah.
So alliums for me, number 1, I think almost would be top of the list.
Yeah. So I want to just go back to glycerin for my next one. Because we're still in autumn and because it's been a mild autumn and it hasn't been too wet yet. When I went for a dog walk yesterday, I was just amazed by the beautiful different colours and shapes of the autumn leaves on the wood floor. And so I actually collected a carrier bag that I had in my pocket as a poo bag, to be honest. And so I thought, right, I'm going to use this for leaves. And so I collected various different shapes. And it doesn't matter about the colour, but where we live in Sussex, there's a lot of chestnut wood here. So that's the sweet chestnuts. And they have a very jaggedy leaf, almost like a sort of saw edge. And so I collected some of those, some quite big ones and some smaller ones. And I collected some oak leaves, which have the lovely classic undulating edge to the leaf. And I actually collected some fig leaves, and we have talked about figs as having this wonderful undulating leaf, but I collected some of those and they weren't quite dry yet. So I'm not sure if they're going to work perfectly, but the combination of the big chisel chestnut leaves, the sort of smaller undulating oak leaves, and the big, almost like lily pad fig leaves. And, anything you want, really. But I brought them in, and what I've done already is I've put them in a bowl, just a shallow bowl, and I've put, again, 1 to 10 glycerin, and I'm just going to leave them for 3 or 4 days in the water with the glycerin. And that, I think, I've done it in the past, it will mean that they retain their texture so they don't get crunchy. And then I may or may not, depending on how good they look, I may or may not just do some colouring over them, whether I'll try not to use a spray paint because of the sustainability issue, but colour them in some way, paint them, or just leave them natural. And they, right the way through from now until Christmas or after, just make such a lovely bowl, just full of almost like potpourri, but an autumn potpourri. And because of the glycerin, just in the water, they keep their texture. And as we go into autumn, just the biggest bowl you can find, just full of those leaves, on the hall table with some candles around them, I think looks rather splendid.
Oh, God, I love the sound of that.
Yeah.
I really love the sound of that.
I think you would like that. So another one from you, Tom?
Well, I think one I have tried it are fennel flowers.
Of course.
And I love them. They've got that architectural kind of shape. And again, I'm not very scientific with the drying of any of this stuff. I do it all pretty much in the same kind of way. And it seems to have worked. But I love those on their own or mixed in with some dried grasses.
Nice. Very nice.
I really like those. Unfortunately, this year I haven't been able to cut any this year, which is a real shame. But last year I had got quite a nice, again, another big vase full of those, and I had it upstairs in the bedroom, and they just look really lovely.
Well, I'll bring you some.
Oh yeah, be fab. Absolutely
I'll
fabulous.
bring you some when I see you next week.
And they create nice shadows. If you get a nice sunny day that streams in through my bedroom at the front of the house gets the sun in the morning, and if the curtains are drawn, it streams in, and the shape of the fennel flower heads just is projected onto the wall. I love things like that. I think it just makes everything really quite special, and a great start to the day to wake up to that.
Yeah, that's such an... I mean, any of the umbels will give that, won't they? I mean, you have to be careful of hogweed because some people are really allergic to it. But I remember, again, hogweed sprayed white so that it had such an elegant sort of... That umbel shape works incredibly well. And so my next one would be one of the grasses. And I think I would probably have to choose Casmantium latifolium.
Oh, gorgeous.
It's just so good. It's got such beautiful bronzy colouring as it stands, as you pick it. And it's very late flowering, so it will still be out in your garden if you grow it. And if you don't grow it, I really recommend thinking of growing it for next year if you like the idea of drying things. It looks like a sheath corn of, a sort of head that's been run over by the tractor. It's got this sort of flat profile, and it's so graceful and elegant. And so that would be wonderful mixed with your fennel flowers. And I love it just on its own. And really often I may buy some anemone coronarias for our Christmas table, like the red Hollandia or whatever. But really often I'll use Casmantium in little milk bottles all the way down the table with some fairy lights running between them. And I can just buy from Sainsbury's or supermarket, whatever, some of the anemone coronarias really quite cheaply, and they've got a vase life of 10 days. And so just with the airy upper story of the Casmantium, you're on to a winner for sustainable Christmas, I would say. So that would be any of the grasses, but I do think Casmantium for Christmas is particularly lovely because it has that sort of coppery, bronzy, slightly Christmassy colouring.
Yeah, no, agree. I love it too. And
so your last one, Tom, before we wrap up?
Well, I'm going to go down the seed head route this time, and the seed heads from somniferum poppies.
Yeah.
Some of my favourites. And I mean, I love them when they're in flower in the summer, and I try and encourage them to self-seed everywhere as much as possible in the most random of places. But one of the main reasons I want to grow them is for their seed heads, and I love them. And if I can get nice, long, tall stems of them, I love the rattle of the seeds, just in a vase or a jug on their own. They look nice, sort of dotted through an arrangement of dried allium seed heads, or even the fennel, actually. In fact, I could try that, actually. That would work really well. I just love all that kind of stuff. And it's the shape of them and that little detail at the top of the seed head.
Yes, the little pepper pot.
Think the pattern is so beautiful.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It's my top seed head one.
I wrote a Christmas book, probably now 20 years ago. And I remember harvesting all the somniferum poppy seed heads and threading them on velvet ribbon as a chain to put down the table. And I did, in the days where we still use spray paint, I sprayed them silver. And it was amazing because it really highlighted every sort of crevice, every nook and cranny. And so I know exactly what you mean about the shape. And that is the thing about painting them. And you can literally just paint them with with poster paint or, any paint. You don't need to spray paint them. But it really highlights the colour form of them. And so that takes me on to my final one. I couldn't decide between amaranth and a bean, but I ended with a bean. And that's because it's linked to this thing of the poppy seed heads. And it's just what I find is There are still a few beans out in the garden now. I was just looking, we've got runner beans that haven't been frosted yet, the lovely one called Black Knight. And we've actually got some of the yellow Monte Gusto French bean, which I was thinking, oh, I'll pick them for supper tonight. And then I thought, oh no, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll pick them and dry them. Because what I find is if I paint them, you get these wonderful sort of serpentine shapes. And with the runner beans, if they've got the bean inside, you get this sort of almost like an undulation, like the sort of the South Downs, this sort of rather lovely, soft undulation of hills. And again, just in a bowl, on a plate, or running down the table centre with some fairy lights and candles, they just add another shape and feel, and they're very, very good as the lower story. So I've got my chrysanthemum as the upper story. I've got my perhaps bought-in flower or hellebores as my middle story, which if you sear the stem ends and cut them on quite a short stem are really good for Christmas, Helleborus niger particularly. And then if I've got these vegetables painted running along the table surface, that's my Christmas table done with some fairy lights that just come down from the attic. And perhaps the odd arrangement in the middle of alliums, just like you say. There you are. Yeah. You haven't had to buy in anything.
See, and all the stuff from the garden, I think that's what's so special about it all. It's stuff that you've enjoyed if it's an allium in the springtime. Yeah. So you've had all the beauty of the flowers. Then I love the flowers when they start to dry in the border. You get those little still pops as they begin to dry. Then you pick them, dry them. So, oh my goodness, that's a whole series of months have gone by these things have provided loads and loads of joy. So
that's Tom, you make me laugh because I do go on Instagram sometimes, and I did see a film of someone harvesting their alliums, putting them on wire, and then placing them through the garden in sort of, particular. And I thought, that's taking things too far. I think really that, bring them in, keep them for winter, but let your garden do your garden. Don't sort of flower arrange in your garden with, placing alliums in. I think get a life is what I thought at that point. Get a life.
I don't know. How do people have time to do that? My goodness.
Anyway, it's sort of quite, it's one of these things called hacks, which I'm also a bit fed up. The 12 best hacks. Anyway, I hope we're not doing that and we're explaining why we've made our choices. But thank you for listening, everyone. And thank you, Tom, so much. Talk soon.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Grow Coquette Arrange with me and Tom Stimpson on our recommendations for what to harvest for Christmas arranging. Seed heads, really, rather than fresh flowers. Next week, I'm actually back with Tom and we're going to start the 12 Best Plants For series that we're going to run right the way through the winter. And we're going to start with our favourite plants for garden structure. So the things to give real architecture to your garden. 6 of Tom's favourites and 6 of mine. So see you then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.